Thank you, gentlemen. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Peters, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this important oversight hearing. In 2021, Congress voted to invest a total of $65 billion in the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD, to advance universal broadband access with over $1.8 billion reserved for my home state of California. By the end of the Biden administration, state deployment offices had made progress to the long process requirements, guidelines, and mandated studies, including in the law. They made awards to grantees who were committed to building fiber lines to hard-to-reach areas and strengthening connectivity in underserved areas. However, lamentably, there were no shovels in the ground, and I was one of the people who joined Republicans to criticize how long it had taken for that to happen and to be an advocate for permanent reform in this field and in others. But by the beginning of 2025, states were ready to begin their build-outs, and the Trump administration decided to issue new regulations which halted any progress. So we're back where we started. We're no better off, and progress is still stalled today as the administration holds the BEAD program's funding hostage. The Federal Communications Commission is guided by the principle that all Americans should have access to communication services. The Trump administration's pause on BEAD funding broadband build-out for over a year goes directly against this principle. It continues the very things I joined Republicans to be critical of under the Biden administration. Commissioner Gomez, how do delays in broadband deployment affect the FCC's abilities to meet its goal of making affordable connectivity accessible to all Americans? And how can we ensure that people have the skills to take advantage of broadband once it's deployed?
Thank you for that question. We want to get broadband to every community, everywhere, as soon as possible, because we really risk leaving people further and further behind. And I'm afraid that we'll go from having a digital divide to a digital chasm if we don't do that. But I'm glad that you raise the totality of what Congress did with the Broadband Equity and Access Program, because one thing we cannot ignore is that we need affordability and we need people to have the digital skills in order to take advantage of the broadband that will give them access to this digital economy. And I'm afraid that this administration has completely lost its focus on that. And that is why I say I'm afraid that if we don't ensure that these networks are sustainable, but making sure that everyone can use them and afford them, we are going to be building bridges to nowhere.
Right. Well, I share that concern, and thank you. And I think it's critical we invest in, continue to improve programs like the Universal Service Fund to support affordable rates in underserved areas and rural access to hard-to-reach areas. And again, when I first came to Congress, we were all talking about rural broadband and how important that was. I think the pandemic showed us that the digital divide exists even in wealthy neighborhoods like the ones that I serve, and I think we should get at it. Along the lines of permit reform, last year I joined with my colleagues, Representatives Joyce and Landman, to introduce the Bipartisan Broadband and Telecommunications Rail Act. We've heard that when broadband companies try to build out communications infrastructure across railroad crossings, the costs and approval times skyrocket. To streamline the deployment process between broadband providers and railroad carriers, the bill would implement firm timelines, conflict resolution processes, and fee scales to help the FCC move faster in support of the public interest. It would outline the responsibility of each party and give the FCC authority where it previously had none. Commissioner Gomez, how would granting the FCC authority over this process speed up access to fast, reliable, and affordable connectivity? And are there other areas in broadband deployment that the FCC does not currently but should have jurisdiction?
Thank you for that question. And I am very supportive of streamlining approvals, and particularly of your bill's focus on making sure that the costs that are being recovered are actually the costs of providing those approvals, and that I think is very important. So I think it's very helpful when Congress gives us instructions on what it is that we're supposed to do, particularly in the area where we are in fact acting to either preempt local regulations or tell others what we think that they should be doing. So I look forward to working with you in the future on this.
Great. Maybe, Commissioner Trustee, any other areas in broadband deployment where the FCC needs jurisdiction, we need to give you jurisdiction?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for your work on this bipartisan legislation. The Commission is working on a number of fronts to remove regulatory barriers that impede the deployment of broadband, whether it's pole attachments, environmental or historic reviews, and expanding access to rights-of-way. I think all of these things will help us accelerate access to connectivity.
Keep us posted on that. I'm out of time, and I yield back. Thank you again.
Thank the gentleman.